I've had this Tesla Model 3 Standard Range Plus, can you believe, for 4 years. How time flies. It's done near as damn it 60,000 miles. How much do you reckon that has cost me? This video is essentially a total cost of ownership for this car. Fuel, depreciation, tax, MOT, repairs, servicing, tyres, all of it. The total cost of me owning this car. Although I have to confess, I haven't included the cost of screen wash. So yeah, maybe I am an EV shill, hiding the cost of electric vehicles to make them look cheaper and more appealing to the market. That aside though, how much do you reckon? 4 years of owning an EV from new. It's not going to be cheap, is it? Yeah, that's essentially my maintenance done now for another several months, apart from checking the tyres, of course. Okay, let's go upstairs. Well, here we are. Like the Renegade Master, we're back once again with the whiteboard of truth. It's been a while since I got this one out, apart from the one I did last week. So, the service, that's an obvious one. Any repair, any service, you know, the general maintenance of the car, excluding tyres, which are there, VED/road tax, whatever you want to call it, that's that one. Fuel costs, of course, and the big one, depreciation. So let's start with service. This is a pretty straightforward one because I've only serviced that Tesla once in the last 4 years. In fact, it was 1 year ago, pretty much to the day. Took it to Tesla for a service and they, well, looked at it, changed a couple of air filters. Oh, I did get some new wiper blades and, of course, an MOT, which it's just had its second MOT, well, last week. So this is all MOTs, 2 of them, and 1 service, which comes to a grand total for 4 years at £221.50. When we were looking at a Kia Niro, that needed to be serviced, I think, every year, and I'm thinking, to do what? It's just an excuse to get money out of you, but Tesla don't have that restriction, so in my case at least, that is it for 4 years. Compare that against another brand new £40,000 vehicle, and well, it should be less. Right, VED/road tax, whatever you want to call it, that's an easy one, that's 0. Next April, it will be £180 a year, as in April 2025 onwards. Handily enough, my car, with it being a March car, means that that will renew March 2025. So I will get 12 months at £0 at that rate, which means it'll be March 2026 before I pay the £180 car tax, if I still have this car anyway. So a little tip for anybody out there, if you've got an electric vehicle, this is going out in March, which you may or may not do, renew your tax, road tax, VED, whatever you want to call it, renew it in March. Or if I've put this out in April, renew it next March, because then you'll get 12 months at 0 rather than, well, whatever it is or whenever it does. So my say at me, for example, the electric outside, I'm going to renew that this month, which means it renews next March. So that happens. I get another 11 months anyway at £0 instead of the 180, which would be what, £15 a month rate. So if you haven't already, do that, and you can renew car tax early. The only caveat, if you've got 6 months left, is that you forfeit the car tax you've already paid, which is £0. So just do it, just get it done. Right, that fuel, I'll come back to that. Let's do tyres first. So tyres, we've had 2 on the front replaced. The rears, we've had 3 rears replaced, but they've only got a couple of thousand miles left on them before I want to replace them. So I'm going to factor in that they've been replaced now, even though they quite haven't yet. So essentially we've got 4 at the rear, 2 at the front. Remember, it's rear wheel drive. So that's 12 tyres. £1,980 for tyres. Now, fuel. Let's do this one next. I've had to obviously do some guesstimations on this one based on the mileage, because the vast majority of miles that we do is done from charging at home, which we're lucky enough to be able to do. So I've divvied it up, if you will, as follows. 50,000 miles have been done from home charging, and 10,000 miles of the 60 from out there charging, if you will, using the public charging network, but not really the public charging network, using the Tesla supercharging network, which is even at the moment where everything's ridiculously high in terms of rapid charging costs, it's actually quite reasonable. I think it's 30 odd p on average, because it varies depending on time of day with the Tesla. But remember, this is from 2020 onwards. So this isn't how much rapid charging costs right now, this is how much rapid charging has cost me over the last 4 years. And 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I mean, there were still a lot of free ones 4 years ago, let alone like 15, 20, 25p. So I've averaged that out at 30 pence per kilowatt hour. In fact, let me put that there. So 30p. And the home charging, I've averaged that out at 8 pence per kilowatt hour. The reason for that is because, again, in 2020, I think I was paying 5 pence per kilowatt hour on the home charging rate, if you will. And that was there for a good year or two. Then it went to 10p for a few months, then back to 7.5 pence. So 8p for my average home charging cost, which factors in some peak rate costs as well. That's actually more than it realistically is. I reckon I'm probably closer to 6.5 over the last 4 years. Not over the last 1 year, 4 years. So I've deliberately biased this whole thing to make it more expensive than it realistically is, just to be on the safe side. I've used at 4 miles per kilowatt hour, which is what the car has averaged over the last 60,000 miles. I've never reset the trip computer. So that's 12,500 kilowatt hours worth of electricity. Charging from home, and 2,500 from using the rapid charging network. So some basic maths, 30p times that, 8p times that, gives me a grand total of, if I could just find the right place on my sheet here, come on, £1,000 for home charging, 750 for that, so that gives us a grand total of £1,750 for fuel costs for 60,000 miles. That, again, is overestimated. I can charge at home. That's the big difference here. If I couldn't, that would be significantly higher. I mean, look, 2,500, 12,500. That's £750, that's £1,000. That just shows you the difference between being on the right tariff at home and having to use even the Tesla supercharging network. In reality, though, I haven't paid for a single supercharger session in my life. Because, well, I think you get some when the car's new, or at least you used to do in 2020, and I've had loads of referrals, quite frankly, so I've got loads of points or free miles to burn through before it will end up costing me anything. So again, in reality, that £750 is probably going to be £250 using the non-Tesla network. Now let's move on to depreciation. I know how much I paid for the car, £39,500, because there was still a grant back then, remember then. And I've added 500 quid for finance costs on top of that, because we did get it on finance, which was at an extremely low rate, but we paid it off really early. So ultimately, it barely cost us anything at all. So I've just averaged it up to £40,000. So we paid 40 for it. The current price or value of that car on Auto Trader right now seems to fluctuate between £18,000 and £19,500, as in the cheapest one with the same sort of mileage of mine is about 18, the most expensive is about 19.5. So I'm going to pick the lowest one, because I always sell my cars privately, £18,000. That gives us a price of, or a depreciation cost rather, of £22,000. I mean, when you write it down like that, that seems, well, it is a lot of money in 4 years. Now, depreciation is a big thing at the moment in electric car world. Oh, they're worthless because of heavy depreciation. Yeah, that's kind of a fallover from the first half of 2023. Depreciation over the last several months, 6 months really, has basically been the same, maybe even slightly less for electric vehicles than petrol. But I have found this from the RAC, which I would consider a reliable source of information, in the UK anyway. So this is about all cars. It is estimated that on average, vehicles drop in value by 50 to 60% within the first 3 years of new ownership. That has dropped 55%-ish, as in from the 40 grand to the 18, in 4 years, not 3 years, 4 years. So I'll leave it up to you whether you think that's, depreciation destroying, because electric cars are, well, you get my point. Is that normal? I would consider a BMW 330i, 330d to be an equivalent to a standard range plus, given the performance, rear-wheel drive, size. I'd love to know how much a 2020 BMW 330i or D cost back in 2020. Obviously there's a billion trim levels with it being BMW and options. How much did that cost versus how much it's worth now, I don't know. I would guess that this has depreciated more because the Tesla Model 3 was, I think, the best-selling car, or very close to, for a year or so in 2021. So when you've got a lot of the same model, it's going to depreciate more, like a Fiesta or a Focus. And there's no point telling me that you can buy a 10-year-old Ford Focus and lose almost nothing in depreciation. That's not... I bought a new car because I wanted to buy a new car. That comes to 25,950, I'll round it up to £25,952, which per year over the last 4 years is 6,488. Again, rounded up. So let's call that £6,500 a year to own a brand new Tesla Model 3 Standard Range Plus for 4 years. That's a lot of money, but for a brand new 40 grand car, I would say that's about average. I've had no repair costs whatsoever. I've barely had any service costs, to be honest, and that's £100 worth of MOTs. The service cost me 120 quid with Tesla because they're like, well, there's nothing to do. The tax has been zero, but won't be in another year or so. Fuel. This is one I really think does need mentioning because I have a screenshot here. Based on today's average petrol slash diesel price, which according to the RAC again is £1.44 for unleaded anyway. So this is petrol, not diesel. Diesel's more expensive. 60,000 miles, assuming you average 50 miles per gallon over the entire 60,000 miles, not just on a long trip or something. At a fuel cost of £1.44 would cost £7,855. So the fuel cost, had I had a petrol car, would have been nearly 8 grand. £6,000 difference in 4 years with fuel, because again, I have the advantage of home charging. So yeah, that's almost a free year, if you look at it that way. If I had bought, let's say, 330 BMW, it would have probably, with depreciation maybe being slightly less, but fuel being £6,000 higher, and that's assuming 50 miles a gallon, which I probably would get from the diesel, but certainly not the petrol one, that'd be significantly higher, then yeah, I'm happy with it. 26 grand, though, 4 years. Think of how many nice holidays over 4 years I could have had with that. But then I couldn't get to work and get paid mileage. So yeah, it's a necessary evil is owning a car, isn't it? And there's always a cost to a brand new one, which is why at the moment, if I was buying or replacing my Model 3, which I may do, it would be with a used one, because when depreciation is high, or just when it exists for any car, petrol or diesel, well, I'm going to take advantage of that market and choose a used one. Another thing that's worth mentioning is that if I'd have sold this in 2022, when it was almost zero depreciation due to chip shortages and various other reasons, COVID as well, then that depreciation figure, albeit over 2 years, not 4, would have probably been about £2,000-3,000. So that per year would have been, well, pennies, quite frankly, because I wouldn't have had a service, I'd have had no tax. That would have been, well, half. That would have been probably 2 grand instead of 20. That would have, again, because it's only 2 years instead of 4, been, let's say at least half. So part of me wishes I sold it back in 2022, got most of my money back, and then bought something else. Oh, insurance. I didn't want to include insurance in this because it's so variable. But I will say that mine has been about static, weirdly, around the £600-650 mark for 4 years. As in, not for 4 years, each year over the 4 years. It's kind of just stayed even. It has gone up this year, although we've not got to the renewal stage yet. I think it's about 800 and odd. So again, that's so variable because it depends on me and where you live. If I lived 15 miles in that direction, where I didn't or wouldn't have a BD postcode, even though we're in North Yorkshire, then it would probably be about £400-500 instead of 8 this year. Have you done this with yours? Remember to include fuel as well, especially if it's not an EV, or if you've got an electric car and you can't charge from home. In the first few years that might have been quite low, but now a lot more expensive. Tyres, that stung when I figured that one out. Just to clarify this again, because it's something I forgot to mention, if you're doing a long journey, this is something that's often misquoted in magazines and online in general. If you're doing a long journey, let's say 500 miles, the first 200 miles, or at least 150 miles of that journey, depending on where you stop, is from cheap home charging, in my case anyway. So the 500 miles isn't at the rapid charging rate. The initial range at home, then anything after that is at the rapid charging rate. So this is often misquoted. People will look at, well, it's 65 pence per kilowatt hour to charge, and I'm doing 500 miles, so it'll cost me this much. Remember, the initial charge is super cheap if you're leaving from home. So that's why this is probably lower than you think, because the bulk of my long journeys, a third or maybe half of that, will be done with the initial home charger. This, in reality, for me, is probably closer to £23,000, maybe 22. It's there or thereabouts. Again, I'll just make sure I biased it so no one thinks I'm cheating. I'm done. That's the cost. Whether I'll keep it or not, I don't know. Watch this space. Thank you for watching. Remember, membership. That gets you videos on Sunday instead of Friday. 99p a month, cancel at any time. And there's Driving Home, the link in the description below, for our second channel. And that's where the podcast lives as well when we can be bothered to do one. All the usual stuff. Like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you soon.